So what was your favorite part of the conference?
I think of all of it, it was interesting that forecasting came out as the number one problem that everyone had. All the other stuff, to be honest, just felt like a little bit of a rehash of last year.
Yeah.
But hearing some of these folks talk about their forecasting problems seemed like, an interesting challenge. The other thing that so I'd say three areas. One that became very apparent to me was how much a lot of these companies are looking for precision in all of this stuff when it's really, the keep it simple principle does just as well if you operate at an order of magnitude level for a lot of the details. And a lot of them get paralyzed trying to get precision.
I felt that way about the forecasting conversation because it was there last year too.
Not as much as
I agree.
I heard about it. Like this year, everyone was like, forecasting, we need help.
I agree. I heard it a lot more this year as well. But I think the difference between last year and this year on forecasting was last year, the forecasting conversation was, you should do forecasting. And this year, the conversation was more like, here's how to do precise forecasting or customized, where you can do it all the way down to the team level, or you do it weekly or monthly, as opposed to, hey, we should probably have a forecast.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's like your second point about like accuracy and granularity was like, I see that applying to the forecasting game where it's no longer good enough to have like a year over year forecast. Hey,
correct.
Add 5% to last year's number and we're good. That's not good enough anymore. So it feels like as FinOps matures, the expectation goes up. Everybody needs to do more forecasting.
Right.
With more precision and more granularity and on a regular, more recurring basis, as opposed to a fiscal year, 12-month forecast versus daily, weekly, monthly. And it was really cool to see some customers doing it weekly. I was like, that's incredible. And they roll it up by team, and then they roll it up by business unit, and then they roll it up by on. That's pretty cool.
No, I agree with that. The other area which is also kind of related was chargebacks. I saw a lot more people talking about chargebacks this time. Like till last year, it was all about showbacks. And like one of the things that I learned is that showbacks really don't work. It's like, okay, it's just a recommendation, and like
they don't work for like changing culture or behavior.
Changing culture primarily,
or
doing anything that's actionable. Like showbacks,
no pain.
There's no pain with showbacks.
You got to make them feel the pain.
Correct. And so some interesting conversations with some large customers where I was trying to, give them examples of how we do chargebacks, where any behavior that we want or like in an internal accounting P&L, we basically say this is discounted for you.
Yeah.
So for example, if you use our multi-tenant centralized database, which is the Aurora instance, which can handle an insane amount of load and capacity, it's free. But if you want to spin off your own RDS instance, then you pay a 3x penalty, and you can change this chargeback charge sheet or your list of prices or price list. You can change that every quarter, depending on the behaviors you really want to impact within your org. And the nice thing is that when you have a P&L based, carrot and stick, the business, the engineering team, everyone gets aligned very quickly, and you're not constantly fighting with your engineering team to get stuff implemented.
That's funny because AWS does that too, which is why you can get a C3 with the highest discount because we're okay giving a little bigger discount to those older instance types that people don't use so much anymore.
Correct. So we do the same carrot and stick internally, and it changes behavior faster than anything else that we've tried. Like a top-down mandate to do something almost never works because you spend all your time trying to work through excuses of why something will not work. And here you just tell them, hey, you make whatever decision you think is right.
Yeah.
We're not forcing you to make any particular decision, but just understand that this is the price list.
Yeah.
And so all the priorities get set correctly. But yeah, other than that, by and large, the thing that I think, I wouldn't say worries me or bothers me, but the thing that I take away is that most within the foundation itself, people are just scared to be opinionated about anything.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In general, I feel like even the push from the foundation itself is to be as neutral as possible. Don't share an opinion, even though customers might be opinionated in how they execute internally, when it comes to their presentations, when it comes to talks, when it comes to conversations, they are encouraged to be as non-opinionated and neutral as possible, which I think is detrimental to the overall community.
That's interesting. The foundation has a pretty strong code of conduct.
Yeah.
And I think people are trying to be really respectful of that. And that's a great place to start from. But there probably are areas where they can bring in some, controversial opinions. It reminds me of a video I did with the foundation a couple months ago on usage optimization versus rate optimization. And I talked about how effective savings rate isn't a good universal KPI for optimization.
Correct.
And I know that that's not like a delightful opinion,
exactly.
right? Because a lot of people are latching onto it. And I actually really like effective savings rate. I think it's a very good KPI. I think it's the best KPI we've had so far in optimization. But it penalizes idle cleanups, right sizing, and other usage optimization capabilities. Because if you delete a bunch of idle stuff or right size a bunch of stuff, your effective saving rate's going to go down.
Correct.
And you're going to get penalized.
Yeah.
So so right now I kind of see a future where we need two KPIs. We need a KPI for discounts and commitments, and a KPI for optimization of resources.
Yeah.
And they're two different things that, I don't know, maybe one day we can figure out how to make a unified KPI for both of them. But right now they kind of have different denominators, and that makes it difficult.
Yeah. We generally, internally, we put things in two buckets. One is waste. Like the waste has to be zero, and it's binary in that sense, in the sense that you want that to be as close to zero as possible. Any waste is seen as a ding on your P&L in a certain sense.
So tell me about waste though, because so some customers come and say, I want zero unused savings plans ever. And because we consider that waste if like on the weekends our usage drops below our savings plan.
Right.
But at the same time, if you actually buy savings plans for resources that are only online 70 or 80% of the time, you still get a bigger discount.
Right.
Then there shows up waste, but your bill goes down.
Yeah. So
do you consider unused savings plans waste in your metrics?
So there are two kinds of resources. One category is, of course, technical, real physical resources, and the other ones are financial instruments.
Okay.
We put them in two different buckets.
Yeah, okay.
Financial instruments is a whole other thing where, for the most part, we don't involve the technical teams on the financial instruments. This is something that finance can usually deal with.
But what about the buying practices or the design architecture practices that have more discount mechanisms?
Like what's an example of that?
Well, like the discount on Lambda is a little bit less. Like the savings plan discount on Lambda is less than the savings plan discount on EC2, for example.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Like how do you bring awareness to the engineers that there's different pricing models on different services that may or may not benefit?
So you can kind of balance that with the resource waste. So for example, if there are a number of cases where we found that our developers, they were kind of leaning towards Lambda, but then they would run really long running jobs on there, like 3 to 15 minutes. Like they said, since Lambdas can run for 15 minutes, why don't we just use this to run a Lambda? And those are all really bad practices, right? So in a bunch of those cases, it's just better to run. So we have more stringent guidelines in the sense that if anything has to run for more than a minute, you better get clearance to use Lambda.
But Lambda is so easy to use.
Lambda is, actually, in a number of cases, it is easier to use EC2 instances.
Well, provisioning it and installing whatever you need on the EC2 instance.
So ECS Fargate, for example.
Okay.
There are a lot of teams that find it way easier to just deploy an ECS Fargate than running a CDK, like a CDK redeploy or an update can take quite a few minutes to kind of get through. And in a lot of other cases, we just run the GitHub Actions just runs and deploys your ECS service.
Okay.
And that works. I'm not saying that's optimal in either way, but the rule of thumb is that when you have Lambdas that are running for more than a minute, that's we've generally been burnt by those kind of usages because somebody has not thought through. Just because
You're
Lambdas
giving me
allow
ideas. Is there a recommendation in there if you have a Lambda running for more than 60 seconds to migrate?
Yeah, I think there are a number of those because so the only thing that you have to trade off for, like, I really wish ECS Fargate had a mechanism by which it could scale down to 0. If Fargate could scale down to 0, then this trade-off becomes really simple.
Yeah.
Here, what you have to do is you have to look at your transaction history and say how much has been the volume, the transaction volume on this, and where's the trade-off. Now, in 90% of the cases, if it is more than a minute and you have large volume of transactions happening, ECS will almost always be cheaper.
Interesting.
The higher the volume of transactions, ECS will be cheaper. If you have really one odd, then the scale down to 0 not being available on ECS kind of penalizes ECS Fargate.
Right.
So
there's some
becomes the
trade-offs.
trade-off.
Yeah,
that becomes the trade-off. But if you look at, say, a 90-day period and you look at your, transaction history or transaction volume, it's relatively simple. But I think in the last 3 to 5 years, I can say for certain, first when it moved from 1 minute to 5 minutes and then 5 minutes to 10 and 10 to 15, in every one of those steps, anytime some team decided, Lambda is going to be easier, it supports 15 minutes, we have got our fingers burnt.
Interesting.
With that architectural decision.
It's like the what is it, the 29-second query extension now.
Oh, there's the API gateway.
It's like,
exactly.
Maybe not a good idea to have something that takes more than 29 seconds.
Yeah. I actually find that, so historically, and I've had multiple conversations with AWS teams on this, I actually really liked the constrained decisions about specific services. Like, I really liked the 30-second timeout on the API gateway for a simple reason that it made you think. It really forced you to think about what an API does, right? If you think that there's even the slightest chance that it's going to be more than 30 seconds, you will design it to be asynchronous, right? Or if you need it to be real time, then go use a WebSocket, right? But don't use the API gateway to kind of just randomly, go to 30 seconds or more. And I know that there was a lot of delight with the community with things going beyond 30 seconds. But
it is a constraint. I mean, but I like your point that efficient engineering requires thought, forethought, foresight. You really have to be thinking about what are you delivering and who wants to wait for it?
Yeah.
And what's the user experience of that, right? And are you allowing for like suboptimal engineering practices because you're using kind of a longer SLA?
Yeah. I mean, there's one end of the spectrum. Like when I first started, development and started at ESW, we had the largest machine that we had 4 gigs of RAM.
Wow.
And you would have to literally just time share this machine called Bambi. And you would have to book time because it cost a bomb to use any time on it.
Wow.
And at that time we were doing these we were trying to figure out whether configurations of cars were valid or not. So these were massive. So if you went to the, any of the automotive OEMs websites, even 2 decades ago, we actually had configuration engines that were run by our technology that allowed you to select, one of 15 different features, and each of the features had a lot of, sub features. And you had to decide right then and there as to whether the configuration was valid. And one of the largest OEMs, not now, but one of the largest OEMs used to support for one of the trucks used to support over 4 billion valid configurations that you could order. Okay. And doing that mathematically back then was incredibly hard. So
I bet it wasn't as hard as actually trying to support a manufacturing pipeline that can do 4.
I'm pretty sure it was. And one of the Japanese competitors, on the other hand, I think had something like 40 in comparison.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of the feature
it's incredible.
Feature set.
And my dad has one of those Scion XBs that I think was famous for being very easy to pare down and not have those configurations.
The toaster.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. When I've priced out cars now, right? It's, oh, well, I want the special off-road package, but then I uncheck the floor mats. It's, oh, well, because you've unchecked the floor mats, you're now at the super off-road package because that comes with better things. And oh, you changed the lug. It's very convoluted, isn't it?
So it was a double-edged sword. So for a lot of these OEMs, being able to offer all those choices and being able to make trade-offs on the side. So for example, if you chose a certain engine with a certain color, then suddenly there'll be a pop-up that said, hey, we don't support this engine with this color. What do you pick? Do you want the engine or the color? That was
such a weird incompatibility.
I know. but those are some of the choices that were deliberately injected so that you could actually gather demand intelligence. Because from a manufacturing standpoint, when you order a car today, it rolls out of the assembly line 3 months from now.
Yeah.
So any dealership actually had to order a car. And then you'd have really weird signals. So for example, they'd look at their sale data. The dealerships don't trust the OEMs. And so the OEM would get their sale data and it would say, hey, there's a really weird green colored car that would roll off the dealership lot in literally 24 hours.
Wow.
And then somebody at the OEM would be like, oh, this is a fast selling car. Let's go do a whole lot more of these. What they didn't realize is that the OEMs paid a holding cost. So typically, let's say the average, sale rate of a car was say 20 days. The OEM would actually pay the dealership 20 days of holding costs. And so the dealership was more than happy to give a discount and get that out, but the sale price was never transferred back to the OEM.
Oh, so they were discounting it to get it off the lot.
So they were discounting it to get it off the lot, and the signals were all wrong. And then, so you had to bring in these mechanisms where you got all this data directly from the customer.
Survival bias. Have you seen that? The graph of the B-24 during World War II.
Right.
And they never came back with holes in these areas.
Exactly.
So they're perfect. It's like, no, that's the opposite signal.
Exactly.
That means that's a terrible area to get shot.
Saying, why do we keep selling these red cars with the little engine? No one.
Exactly. And but the point that I was trying to make was that with such limited resources, we had to make a lot of little decisions about how to use those resources, whether it was CPU, whether it was memory. And there was a lot of engineering work that went in to make sure that we were making all the right choices for that scale. Now, I don't think it's necessary to go to that extreme today. I mean, we have, and it's like the latest instances have 24 TB of RAM and, an infinite amount of CPU and stuff. I don't think you need to go to that level quite yet, but I don't think it's wise to lose the good engineering decision-making process as you're designing your services and your apps. Like when you're doing event-driven architecture, there's so many, like you just go through a well-architected framework. It's a very disciplined way of looking at the architecture, the service, and all of that stuff, right? And a lot of teams don't do it.
It's tough though, because we don't always know the trade-offs our customers are making.
Yeah.
Right? And so they may be making trade-offs that maybe are poor from an architecture perspective, but maybe very business advantageous. We don't know. Like legacy is definitely the case where sometimes you have really hilariously designed things and when you look back on them, but they were designed that way intentionally for a good reason. But we don't know. Context is hard. And like, I can't tell you how many customers have like lifted and shifted. And I've heard this story so many times in different organizations. They lifted and shifted. They don't have the code base for these apps anymore. They don't even know who wrote it, right? There's like no comments in the code.
Right.
Like their entire job is just to make sure this thing does not fall over.
Yeah. So they just have a binary or some artifact that they
it's like running and you're like, let me copy the OS, let me copy the drive, and move it into the cloud and start it up and put a new IP on it and reroute all the traffic to it. And let's all hold our breath and see if it works, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of critical stuff, right? Like how our taxes get collected.
Legacy is code for profitable, right?
Yeah.
But I actually think that there are good architecture decisions being made when you're doing that. For example, you care about the service not going down and then you make certain decisions. Should I leave it in the data center because I'm never going to be able to replicate this, right? Like you would, just because it runs on an NFS server in your data center, moving it to EFS might not be the wisest decision. You don't know what dependency exists on the NFS service or how it would behave, how it would
do
something.
I've run into like organizational mandates where they're like, everything must go. And so you're like, what do? You lift and shift it. That's what you do. Or there's a time limit. I hit this actually in my career where we had a lease, and the lease renewal was minimum 3 years, $10 million.
Okay, so you have a pretty hard deadline.
We have absolutely massive deadline, and we had like 10,000 instances in a physical data center in South Center. Right. Like near the mall. And it's like on a fault line, by the way. Don't put a data center in the South Center, South Seattle area. Terrible idea. But we had a ton of instances in this team that I ran that we all had to migrate to. And we were like migrating them to another data center. And halfway through, leadership is like, no, everything cloud. You have unlimited budget. Budget is not a concern. We have to get out. Like you probably, and they were probably thinking like, well, you can't spend more than $10 million. You know, just move everything to cloud. It would be more expensive for us to have to pay the renewal of this building than whatever it takes to just move the stuff quickly. Surprise, surprise! It costs way more than $10 million.
No, I've done that multiple times. I've done that over 100 times, by the way.
Wow!
The day we acquired a company, we actually set a 90-day deadline to move everything over to the cloud because from a business standpoint, managing multiple data centers all over the place was just not tenable. We wouldn't be able to scale. We wouldn't be able to support it. It just didn't work from the business model standpoint. But that said, like even within that 90-day window, there was a plan. The plan was move it into this VMware setup because that is the closest you would get to a data center setup because we were running things on VMs 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
So move it into VMware. Yes, it might be a little expensive, but there was a run book.
Yeah.
Move it there first, then get it into an optimized state. And it was still thought through. The thing that I keep advising people is that don't forget that thought process. Just don't go blindly.
Yeah.
You know, you can't ignore the architecture decisions. And the more constraints you have, I think I'd say you end up making good decisions. You have to think through them.
Hopefully. Sometimes the trade-offs are so large. Yeah.
I think there's a great place to start. I think before we go too far into the weeds, Rick, welcome to the show. Okay, I want to introduce Rick Ochs of AWS. Rick, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about the different teams that you run, the different services under your purview, and
all the new stuff that's been going on in your world. Let's just keep expanding.
Do you want the intro or the new stuff?
Let's do intro, and then we will
okay.
go right into this.
So my name is Rick Ochs. I lead the optimization product management team. That includes Compute Optimizer. It includes Cost Optimization Hub, Savings Plans recommendations, RI recommendations. It also includes actually the savings plan purchase experience as well. So the button you click to make that purchase is on my team. It's a fun team because we get to help people save money. And I don't know what's more fun than that. So
a curious question. Generally, from my experience in the AWS world, there are a whole lot of teams that are tackling different aspects of saving money for customers. You've got the cost insights team, with Steph and those folks. You've got your team. You've got a whole lot of other teams. Like, how does it all fit in? Are they all independent and just trying their best to do?
No, we actually have like an internal collective. It's called the FinOps Collective. And we all kind of meet together on a regular basis to stay in sync with each other because there's a lot of things going on.
Right.
And the optics team with Alex and Steph, and that's a fantastic organization, but they're a little bit smaller. And they focus in on specific customers. They love to like get boots on the ground and help them out. And then we have CO&A, which is cost optimization, and forget what the A stands for. There's too many acronyms in this industry, right? And they're a bigger team. They help everybody. They help pretty much everybody that wants to engage and talk about optimization.
Right.
And so they have some toolkit things they pull out and do assessments and some of that sort of stuff. There's also just our TAM community, which the TAM community can really step in and do some incredible things as well. And within TAMs and solution architects, there are a certain number of them that have come together to create a community, a technical field community for cloud financial management. So there's another group of people, and those people generally have some experience and skill working with customers to help them do FinOps things like chargeback, showback, forecasting, allocation, these sorts of things. So that organization is... they're a lot of fun too. They come with like real customer use cases and problems all the time, and we interface And it's a great source of feedback for us as we build the next wave of tools and capabilities, right? So I try to like gather as many avenues of feedback as I can, like whether that's like direct customer conversations or each of these teams that work with customers directly. But from an engineering perspective, most all that's in our organization in insights and optimizations.
Got it. And all the cloud intelligence dashboard and the Kudos dashboard, all of that stuff also comes under your org, or is
actually,
that another separate one?
So in the intelligence dashboards, were sort of the brainchild of several different folks in the field. So we have Yuri. Alex, like I can't even really name all the people that have contributed to it. It's such a long list. In meeting with customers, understanding that we need a more flexible dashboard type experience that they can customize and adjust and roll out really easy and deploy in places where more visibility is needed. It really came out of TAMs and SAs and field folks, coming together to build the CIDs. It's still managed and maintained and owned by TAMs. So it does not roll up into our engineering organization.
That's really neat that it was developed to immediately meet needs based by people who were, directly talking to the customers. That's
it's cool to see that if you see a problem and you write up an idea at this company, nobody really gets to say that's not my job, right? Like if you see something you want to go solve, just go solve it, right? Like, I mean, it's really good to align with all the other different teams, but it's sort of a side effect of the two-pizza team effect where each team has quite a bit of autonomy to solve problems that they see. Sometimes we build two of the same thing once in a while, right? And we go consolidate that and work together to figure out like, hey, how do we solve these things together? But it means that there's a lot more opportunity for customer obsession, and we don't sit there kind of spinning our wheels. We're building things. We're trying to solve the problem.
Yep. So you don't have to have this perfectly coordinated Apple store of everything is exactly designed to work perfectly together necessarily. That kind of evolves.
No, that's not the Amazon way, right? Like we don't really do PowerPoint slides too often, right? We don't do the suit and tie stage presentation too often, right? Like we like to build things and we want to see our customers smile, right?
I love that. That's
I think
fantastic.
one of the core things that I absolutely love is that it's probably over a decade ago when I was at one of the meetings. One of the product managers told me, "It's like we have a mandate to never build anything that a customer has not asked for," and that was such such a revelation. It's so different from a lot of the other conversations that I had had where product companies build their products and then ship it out and hope that customers are going to use it. And here, literally, the product manager was sitting over there just listening. Their job was to listen so that they could figure out what needs to be built to solve the customer's problem. And that was very refreshing to see.
Yeah. That was probably the biggest driver for joining the foundation. Was at FinOps X last week, we brought 12 product managers. Like very significant. And we're talking like the Kerr, Cost Explorer, just all of my tools are pretty well represented. So Compute Optimizer and Cost Optimization Hub and Savings Plans. We had our Savings Plans PM there. People were chasing her around the conference trying to give feedback, which is great, right? Like we love that. It was it's a great opportunity to just like not talk and just listen for a little while, right? Just go to some sessions and listen. And it's an opportunity, right? It's yet one more avenue. And what's really cool is all of the feedback we get at the conference is like 300 level. I don't have to explain what a savings plan is to somebody before they give me feedback, right? Like they're coming at me with like, hey, I have this very specific use case that is a problem for us and we want this solved. And I'm like, okay, let's take this down. Let's figure it out.
That's one, actually setting some context. This is the third FinOps X that's ever existed. It is the Monday after FinOps X. Now, this is the first year that AWS has been an official part of the FinOps Foundation. So how was that different then? What was the major differences? You told us about the much larger delegation. What was it like the first year as an AWS official member of the FinOps Foundation?
Yeah, our booth was jam-packed the entire conference. and that was fun. A lot of people came up and they said, "Oh, we're so glad you're here." Some people said, "You're finally here. Come on," right? but it was relieving. Like, yeah, we're here. We're here to listen. The intent and working with JR and getting the agreement together and joining forces and everything was important to us because we see the value. Not just that, but customers asked us, and that was huge too. Like, I was at FinOps last year. It was kind of a nice opportunity to gather some of that feedback and document it and say, okay, customers see value here. They'd like us to engage. They want to make sure we're plugged in and paying attention and listening. Right. And okay, we hear that. And we have those, it was interesting. It's like the same customers that we typically talk to on a regular basis anyways, but when they're all together in the same place at the same time, having the same storylines and use cases, the value of being there and being part of that conversation is pretty high. So capturing all of that data, bringing it back to our organization and saying, okay, here's the value. Let's plug in. So we did. So we have John on the governing board, John Phillips,
right?
General Manager of Insights and Optimizations. I'm on the advisory council. And then we also have Roy Woolman on the Focus Steer Co., which is really big because contributing to the Focus standard or the specification, we launched last week. One of the big announcements was we are now supporting the Focus 1.0 standard in preview, but we added 5 additional fields.
Yep.
And I know 4 of them are ones that, hey, we can work to get into the next standard, the 1.1 standard, right? So we can kind of preview them a little bit, get some feedback, and AWS can contribute to the Focus standard to make sure people have the granularity we need. Because right now, the Focus specification kind of stops at the service granularity. So we wanted to go a little deeper. So we added some additional columns to go more granular with the Focus standard. So we think customers would want that.
Got it. I want to dive a little deeper into this because I want to also make sure that people understand the whole breadth of the conversation and the choices that have been made so far, because I think it's going to impact a whole lot of people and they're going to have to make a bunch of decisions. So I'm going to lay out a bunch of questions for you up front, and then we can go through them one by one.
Sounds good.
The first one was, this is not the first time that an attempt has been made to create an open standard around cost. Open cost has existed for maybe 4 or 5 years now, I think, or at least 3 or 4 years. So how is Focus different? And surprisingly, all the cloud providers were already part of the standard definition for open cost. Then particularly with AWS, you've got Kerr that kind of had all of this basic data already in place. Now you've got a standard around it, but you had everything that you needed in Kerr, fundamentally, mapping back. So it's just potentially a narrower view over Kerr, maybe simpler in some sense when you're trying to marry different data sources coming in together. But I want to talk about the distinction between Kerr 2.0, and why Kerr is now called Legacy Kerr.
Okay.
Is there a plan to deprecate it or something like that? Because there was a lot of chatter around calling it Legacy. And then I do want to talk about where Focus is in terms of being the master data source for a whole lot of other stuff. Because if you really look at usage on the ground for people, almost for anything, whether it's optimization, whether it is for billing, showback, chargeback, this Kerr data has historically been our master data set.
Yeah.
Right? So are the tools and everything else now going to be more Focus spec, compliant and going that way? So yeah, I want to just open that up for discussion.
Okay.
There are a lot of different questions in there. We can take them.
Well, yeah, I think I heard like 7. So let's start. We'll start by talking about Legacy Kerr 2.0, Focus, the difference between these 3. We heard from our customers that Kerr files can be large.
Yeah.
It can be hard to manage. Customers wanted to trim down their Kerr files. So Kerr 2.0 was really to make handling your data easier, because you can pick and choose your columns. You can configure how you want this file to look. When we add additional columns, it's not going to break. Like if you had some Kerr processing capability that was like expecting a very specific schema. If that schema ever changed,
Right.
it might have broken your application. We always encouraged our customers to design it in a way where new columns wouldn't break things. But that, again, from a best practice standard, you can give advice, and that doesn't always mean that customers won't break, right?
Yeah.
So Cur 2.0 really gives us a lot more flexibility to add more data to the exports without breaking people, and you can pick and choose which data sets you want. And so we really feel like that's a much better long-term operating model for acquiring data out of AWS. You also saw the same thing where the data exports page in the billing cost management console had some other data exports launched with it last week as well. So we had the cost optimization hub exports. So we really envision a place where you can export all sorts of data. You can pick and choose the columns, you can pick and choose a location, and all sorts of other customization options. So you don't necessarily have to be calling a ton of APIs or building some sort of a solution that pulls a bunch of regional API data all together and then build your own data mart or whatever solution you have to get all this data. You can now get it in a single file. Done, right? Simplicity for our customers that build. And we've seen customers build some really impressive products on top of the Cur. We love that. We know that that's not going to slow down anytime soon. And building on top of Cur 2.0 will probably save a lot of headaches. That's our hope. Whether you choose Focus or Cur 2.0, we've designed that so you can pick and choose based on your use case. And if you're going to merge that data with other data sources, great. Focus is a great option for you. If you need more granularity, Cur 2.0 is a great option for you. And by providing some choice here, customers and actually partners and third parties that build tools can pick and choose whatever data source, whatever data set they want.
Do you see complications arising or suboptimal, decisions being made from a simple standpoint that you're going to have a plethora of tools that are going to be used by customers, and each tool is going to probably pick and choose a different data set. And then, like in a lot of cases, one of the issues that we had with Cur was that in a ton of accounts, you turn on Cur, the cost of Cur exceeds the actual monthly cost of, all the resources that are currently running because they're probably idle or, just as a backup. So, but you turned on Cur and suddenly there's tons of data that's being produced every single day.
And so the ability to customize, turn off like 80% of the columns you might not need for your use case.
Correct. So Cur 2.0 makes a lot of sense over there.
Yeah.
But then when we choose tools that run on the Cur data, right? I'll give you an example of Cloudfix. Like right now, Cloudfix supports Cur as the default. We're looking to support Focus very shortly.
Okay.
But not everyone might choose to support all the different formats.
Yeah.
Right. And then when customers decide to choose specific tools, you're going to have this proliferation of different tools that use different kind of data sets that are all going to be replicated.
Yep.
Because there might be one tool that only does Cur, or the other tool does Focus. It's Focus compatible because that's the in thing right now. So do you see that complexity proliferating, or it's a wait and watch and see how it evolves?
You kind of hinted at the answer I had here. Like we wanted to provide the choice for people to pick the data source and configuration they wanted for whatever their use case is. We know most people are still using Cur, right?
Yeah, true.
It's been out there for a long time, and a lot of products are built on top of Cur. A lot of great products that, ideally they would use Cur 2.0 in the future so they can customize and really get the data they need and keep the cost low for the customers. Organizations that want to use Focus, I think, the biggest use cases are really like, hey, I've got 5 data sources. I don't have a common schema. I would have to go build a bunch of code to reconcile these different columns together and or make new columns and transform all of them into a new column. And how do I get a unique identifier system across all of these data sources, right?
Yeah.
So Focus really does solve a lot of those problems. Our intention is to make our customers' lives easier by having access to these. Now, are there going to be tools that do Cur 2.0 or Focus? Absolutely, right? There's a lot of products out there that have granularity requirements that Focus doesn't serve today.
Correct.
Ideally, Cur 2.0 is a great solution for them. for products that really want to tackle the multi-data source problems, you have a focus now. You don't have to go spend weeks or months. I mean, I had this experience when I was at Turbo. We were supporting multiple cloud providers and trying to reconcile data across all three of them.
Yeah.
And it was like a nightmare. It was not an enjoyable experience trying to figure out how to show cost by service when the service names are different. Correct. Things like that, right?
And their scopes are not necessarily the same either, right? There's like Venn diagrams that kind of overlap but kind of don't.
And then you basically choose the least common denominator fit across multiple cloud providers. So you don't have resolution.
Well, even like grouping. Grouping is such an important construct for understanding your org structure.
Yeah.
And one company has folders and another company has resource groups, right? Yeah. And like you have to reconcile them.
Right.
And you can reconcile them several different ways, but what if the way you reconciled them doesn't match the way somebody else did?
Right.
What are you going to do about that?
I just want to highlight how hard a problem this is. So I started my career in medical IT, healthcare IT. And one could argue that electronic health records were almost too open in that. So, okay, great, they're electronic, but are they just, I mean, it's not quite exchanging text files electronically, but there could have been a lot more structure that would have made interchange a lot easier. So just because something's an electronic health record doesn't necessarily mean that you can hand it from one hospital to another and it makes any sense at all. And so there's a lot of structure that has to be added later. And so it's a really tricky problem to say, okay, I want enough granularity for it to be useful. I don't want to, but then still have multiple, not necessarily overlapping services be able to use it. That's a really tricky sweet spot to get right.
Yeah,
so
it is.
Do you see focus as I guess, how would you rate that in terms of granularity versus usability on, like, if you were using, I don't know, a couple of different cloud providers?
Well, I think focus is going to mature and solve the granularity problem. I really do. I have a lot of faith in the Focus Steer Co. Some really fantastic people working at it. I know a lot of companies are investing in it. The schemas are going to evolve. It takes a little bit more time because we have to go through reviews and approvals from a process perspective because it's an open specification. But I would love to see Focus mature to have sub-service granularity all the way down to the resource level. That'd be tremendous. I'd love it if Focus could one day support split cost allocation, right?
Yeah.
If you can do something like assign and segment your egress costs to an application, that would be tremendous. Talk about the holy grail, right? Like, I hope we get there one day. I mean, we're getting there.
Hard.
It's really hard, but we're getting there with Kerr 2.0.
Right.
We're getting there. We launched ECS split cost allocation, and then we did EKS split cost allocation. And you can kind of see where we're going, right?
Right.
So we want to make this easier for customers. We know that unit economics is, it's, I can't say it's the end of the road, but it's definitely down the road, and it's something that we want to help everybody get to without having to build a whole lot of custom solutions. But if we can get cost per app figured out as an industry, not just my company, but as an industry, if we can all together move towards a future where we can get cost per app in a really easy, simple, unified way, then you can bring whatever business metric you want to the table, whether that's number of transactions, number of sales, number of users, number of hours of media watch, whatever your metric is, and just divide by cost of app, and boom, you have your unit metric, right?
Yeah, got it.
Imagine some sort of a future where it's just really a single division problem to get unit economics for all of your apps. Isn't like, and then there's flying cars, right? Like it sounds like a pipe dream future potentially, but what an exciting way where it's so easy to explain the value of cloud based on the value of a company's revenue, income, user satisfaction, whatever metric that matters, right?
It's funny. I'm kind of trying to think of an analogy for, okay, if you're new to unit economics, one way to think about it is, and tell me if this analogy doesn't land or not. It's like if you're cooking for your family, right? And you want to know how much does this meal cost per thing? Well, maybe you bought some chicken and you use the entire packet. Okay, so that's easy to allocate. But then you also grab some seasonings, right? Where you grab a little bit of this, you grab a little bit of this. And so how do you add it up? And maybe it substituted for going out this time, but it didn't substitute last time. You wouldn't have gone out anyway. So how do you really quantify, like, how much did this actually cost and how much did it actually benefit?
Did you use some internet access to look up the recipe and you have to amortize out your your Comcast bill.
And would I have had internet anyway, even if I didn't look up recipes? So how do I?
Yeah,
Then
it's
account
like
for
power
that.
cooling. I remember having the debate over power cooling. Like, okay, so the facilities team pays that bill. So do we have to count it?
Right.
We don't want to count it. Yeah.
Because they would have needed it anyway. But
Right.
It's nice that we're nice and cool.
Yeah.
So
And they would disagree with that. They're like, no. We wouldn't have had this power bill if you weren't in here.
Yeah.
speaking of power cooling, I need to get that for the studio.
Nice.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry, because CloudFix uses AWS recommended savings techniques. It fixes, not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the link to start saving now.
One question that remained unanswered was, why legacy? Because a lot of the chatter that I heard over there was, seems like this is going to be deprecated because it's called legacy.
No, it's AWS. We don't really deprecate things.
Yeah, so just wanted to put it out there. This is not going to be.
We want, like, if people are going to visit the exports page, we want people to use Curve 2.0. We do. We want to drive people to that. You can still use Curve. We don't mind. Go for it. But you should use Curve 2.0.
One suggestion, let's call it classic.
Classic instead of legacy. Okay. Well, I can pass that on.
Yeah. Great. You want to take a short
let's
break?
take a short break, and then we come back to talk about the new product launches.
Yeah.
And
all the amazing new announcements.
Yes.
Yeah, there's so many of them.
All the new
to go over.
announcements. And then talk about, wow, we are on the road to reInvent now.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk about, you had several launches, you and your team, throughout the last week, I guess, during FinOps X. So let's talk about each one of those. We had the data exports for Focus. Should we start with that one?
Yeah. So we launched a new ability to export your cost and usage data in the Focus 1.0 schema preview. We also added 5 additional columns in that export. 4 of them, I think, will be useful for added granularity, and a 5th one is more AWS specific. That's our Focus launch.
Got it. And it's in the same dashboard where you could export all the other pieces of data. Like you could use the same dashboard to do the Curve legacy, and then Curve 2.0 exports as well. You just pick one of those options and export, right? Choose an S3 bucket.
That's right. So you have all of your export options on one page now. So nice and easy, one central location. So you can manage and configure them or edit. Really easy.
Got it. A quick question on when you think about this from a product management standpoint. We now have Focus 1.0. You're going to have a Focus 1.1. Do you foresee these as becoming different feeds that come? Like, are we going to have 15 different feeds over a period of time as an option? I mean, that's we see that with instances today. Or I'm just asking from a product management standpoint. Well, do you think of it as let's just do them all separate, depending on whatever version compatibility might be relevant, or in the Focus team, do you look at backwards compatibility? And
yeah,
like
I was going to say backwards compatibility. Okay. I think from a product management perspective, we're looking to avoid tech debt as much as we can, right? So maintaining a bunch of different Focus feeds over time would be very difficult. So ideally 1.1 would be backward compatible with 1.0 and so on and so forth.
Got it.
Now, what that's going to look like when it's launched, I don't know. I'd have to ask our Focus SteerCo representative and the product management team there, but definitely looking for backwards compatibility. It's hard to deprecate things.
Yeah.
And we typically don't do that if there's customer value and customer use on products and features, right? So
got it. I mean, given the first set of fields that are available, it feels like you could absolutely make it additive and you would just add new columns or whatever.
Ideally, the definition of the columns doesn't change.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
You can still launch an M1.small, right?
You
can.
I know you can go back to the C3s. I haven't tried anything earlier than that.
But now they are on the Nitro. So the new M1s are on the Nitro, but I don't know why somebody would.
Yeah, it's not really an M1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, they called it something else.
Yes, equivalency.
So you had another big launch, which was about RDS. Can you tell us about RDS and Compute Optimizer?
Yeah, so we launched right sizing recommendations, and it's actually more than this is like the most full featured recommendation launch we've ever had. This is right sizing recommendations for MySQL and PostgreSQL. This is idle recommendations as well. So if there's 0 queries, less than 5% usage over the entire look back period, you'll get an idle recommendation to delete or shut down. It is also all of the storage recommendations for every single RDS instance you have, for those two engines. And that's awesome because GP2 to GP3 is there, IO1, configured IOPS amounts, whether you want to configure higher or lower IOPS amounts, right? Compute Optimizer is looking at all that and telling you, hey, you can lower your IOPS amount, save money, or increase it, right, if there's performance issues that we detect. We also launched, as part of this, out of the box, the ability to hit 32 or 93-day look-back periods. So
Nice.
This is something that we found when we launched customized preferences for our EC2 recommendations at reInvent last year, that customers loved the longer look-back periods because they really want a lot of data before they make a decision.
Right.
And so launching, especially with databases, right, which are a little bit more longer lived typically than EC2 instances, they're more stable as well. You usually don't spin up a database, test something out, delete it.
Right.
That doesn't happen quite as often. So longer look back periods are something we wanted to do. So that's done. Also, RI awareness on launch of this feature. So day one, the recommendations are aware of every single database that is covered by an RI and that is not covered by an RI.
Got it.
And that's really cool because if you have a great discount on an RI, you're going to still get recommendations to save money on your storage.
Right.
And then if you don't have RIs, or if your RIs are expiring, it's a fantastic opportunity to look at those recommendations. You'll also see move to Graviton recommendations, which will save you a good chunk of change and increase performance at the same time, which we love to do that, like we've talked about in previous podcasts, right? Improving performance by going to faster CPUs, which lowers your query time, and therefore you can reduce core count. You get the best of both worlds, right? And then, who doesn't love to pay less money for better performance? And then as those RIs expire, whatever, you're going to see the recommendations pop up. It's a great time to take some of those recommendations and then reapply the RIs on top. So it works with our RI recommendation engine as well.
So this wraps a whole lot of features. Like when you said it's RDS, it's things that we've been talking about individually, like you said, IO1 IOPS, GP2 to GP3, but being able to do this all in one place and for your database, right? Which is, like you said, that's often the core protected, that's like the inside of the temple, right? This is the thing that you don't let get messed up, right? So it's almost like a testament to how much trust Compute Optimizer is built up that now you can say, okay, let's optimize the database. Let us tell you what levers to pull.
Yeah. Can we just dive a little bit into that? Because this is the number one question that every customer asks about. Why should I feel secure in the recommendation that comes up in the computer? What kind of explainability goes in there?
So I would say that's probably the number one question across all recommendation types globally is why should I trust you?
Right.
Especially coming from AWS, what's your incentive, right? Our incentive is to have a happy customer. Right. Our incentive is to make sure that you're using AWS with elasticity and flexibility. Right. We worked with the RDS engineering leaders. We worked with some of the most incredible database engineers I've ever met. And we refined the sizing model with them for a very long time. We tweaked it, we tested it, we tweaked it again, we tested it again. We went through a very significant engineering effort for this launch. Actually, I would say, not that my tenure is very long at AWS, this is one of the largest projects I've been a part of.
Got it.
So in collaboration with RDS, they've been just fantastic partners because they care so deeply about their customers' performance experience. It was so important for us as a group, both us and the RDS team working together to make sure we do not cause harm to our customers from a performance perspective. That's number one. cost savings is almost secondary, to be honest with you, because who cares what it costs if it's down?
Right.
Right?
Correct.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
If you're just trying to save money on the cloud, just
shut it all
off. Right. So the performance characteristics and traits, you'll actually see that the right size recommendations won't downsize memory because we can't guarantee your query performance when we reduce memory capacity. So we don't touch memory. We still have quite a lot of savings because we can still do Graviton. We can move you to instances with a smaller core count with the same amount of memory.
Right.
We can still optimize storage. We can still find your idle. So there is still a lot to go get out there to provide savings and improve performance without hurting things, without having to do the analysis. Is this going to hurt query performance, right? We can sort of avoid that by always making sure we're going to go to a faster processor, or we're always going to make sure memory is the same, right? And so we have a lot of constraints built into the engine to make sure. Now, that means if you want to be more aggressive than the recommendations, you are free to do so.
Right.
But these recommendations out of the box couldn't hurt a fly.
Got it. What kind of explainability do customers expect or will expect to see in the dashboard once they see these recommendations?
Yes, we have our finding reason codes. It'll tell you exactly which of the different performance metrics are really driving the recommendation. So if it's an IOPS kind of centric recommendation, hey, we think you should increase your size because, and we'll tell you why. Right. Hey, you're constrained on IOPS. Or, hey, we see a CPU constraint or memory constraint. We're gonna tell you to go up in size. And then we have all of the performance utilization graphs, kind of similar to EC2 recommendations, where you can see CPU, memory, disk, network, I/O, throughput, both input and output and output I/O, all sorts of cool stuff. In the RDS recommendations, we also have some really cool additional ones that are database specific. If you turn on RDS performance insights, you get DB load.
Right.
You get swap in and swap out. Really cool stuff. You can take that stuff to a DBA and show it to them, and they're going to immediately know what's going on with this database.
Yeah.
You do not have to go to CloudWatch and pull all of these metrics together from different sources and then create a dashboard. It's all there for you.
Right.
So a DBA should be able to go to a recommendation, click into the details, look at it and go, boom, yep, that's it. That's exactly what I would be doing if I was to size this thing by hand with a decoder ring. We've just done it for you across every single RDS instances you have, right? So it's like, it's the scale problem.
Right.
Who has time to one by one look at every single RDS instance to figure out the right size, the storage options and performance that you need out of your storage layer, let alone the compute layer of it.
Yeah.
And so the scale problem was such an important thing for us to solve.
Yeah, it's interesting because databases are they're their own entire universe of performance, right? And like you said, DBAs, it'd say, okay, here's a query that's doing a full node scan, or maybe this is driven by a badly written query that's joining the biggest table against itself many times and blowing up the memory or whatever. Yeah. So how much of the variables that you look at are you looking at query level, or are you looking at what if you had a batch process that ran every day on the 31st, right? And that's the only time you needed the big instance size. Can you pick something like that up, or?
Oh yeah, we'll pick it up. No question. We're using P99.9 for this one. So we're going to get it.
So incredibly safe.
Incredibly safe. And we know that, look, like when you drive to the grocery store, your foot's not on the gas pedal 100% down the hole there, right? Like, we know that, right? So we know that like a normal usage pattern for these sorts of resources is variable. It's dynamic over time. You know, you come to a stop sign and you let off the gas pedal. It doesn't mean your car needs to be replaced. Databases are very similar to that.
True. Where
usage is very patternistic. It goes up and down a lot. I was talking to a customer about it the other day, and they're like, we always want to see between 40 and 80%. And I'm like, okay, well, do you run your throttle between 40 and 80% the entire life of your car? Like, that sounds kind of, I don't know, high usage to me.
And would you consider your car a waste if you didn't have your foot
right?
At
like, are you red? Like, and I encourage them to think about it more in percentile. Like, if this thing is in use 90 minutes a day or 200 minutes a day, or like, right, the amount of time actually matters more than the number, the peak,
Yeah.
whatever you're going to. And this is something that like we really need to wrap our heads around as an industry, that peak performance versus amount of time at peak performance. The amount of time matters actually quite a bit more
Right.
than the peak performance.
Yeah.
Are you full throttle for 10 seconds or 2 hours?
Only if you're a drag racer.
Right. Well, ideally,
Which
six
is a
seconds,
very
right?
odd use.
Like,
case, right?
yeah, it is like, okay, do you drive to the track and are you full throttle the whole way there? You know?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of education I think we need to do when it comes to performance and FinOps, because saving money, hey, I want average CPU utilization above a certain threshold or percent across my whole environment. I get this question a lot because customers are like, hey, what's like a good average CPU? And I say, don't use CPU average. That's my response, because CPU average is a red herring.
Yeah.
It'll send you on a pretty wild goose chase that may not be valuable for your company, because it doesn't take, BCDR and backups and failover and fault tolerance and hot standby and these sorts of things that are really important to us, right?
Yeah. Follow-up question to that is, so implementing these changes is actually really trivial. You can literally just go into the RDS, the console, pick an instance where the recommendation is there, and literally just change a few parameters based on the recommendation. We're going to be putting out a blog post about how to actually fix it if you needed to.
Oh, that's cool.
It's really trivial to do it, and it's all there in the instance type details.
Yeah, and we
modify that.
we link to it too.
Right.
So you can just, in the computer optimizer console, just click on the DB name and boom, change it.
Correct.
I mean, maybe wait until, a downtime window. Right. But we want to continue helping customers solve, we want them to take the recommendation so they get the benefit, right? It's like, there's a lot of recommendation products out there that pump out a lot of semi-okay recommendations that people look at, but you don't really get value until you take it.
Yeah. One other thing that I recommend to everybody is please take a look at RDS proxy to always front your database, because it mitigates a whole lot of situations specifically when you're restarting instances and stuff like that, because the RDS proxy will at least buffer some of those requests that are coming in at times. And if you are not using RDS proxy when you're using Lambdas, that almost always feels like a bad idea. So if you're not using an RDS proxy today, I'd say probably just launch it.
Pro tip,
at least it's a pro tip to get it to buffer your scenarios, so that you at least know that things will be buffered for a little bit. You mitigate your risks, and in general, it's a good practice because your connection pooling is handled by RDS proxy, and particularly when you're using a whole lot of different use cases, whether it be your lambdas, whether it be your Fargate instances, as your consumers scale up and down, which is ideally the scenario in your environment. The buffering you won't basically be whiplashing your database day in and day out with the sheer number of connections being opened, because that's another one of the. So in a lot of cases, we actually found that just putting the RDS proxy in front of the database removed the requirement to actually scale up the database by a lot.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Because you just have lambdas literally creating connections, and the database was spending a ton of time just managing those connections.
Yeah.
And so making sure that the RDS proxy was there in front of it, in, I'd say, at least 8 out of 10 cases, mitigated the need to increase the size of the database or to manage performance. You'd suddenly see a massive drop in the usage of the database itself, because you're not launching 10,000 connections at the same time.
You're giving me flashbacks to Killspid 53 T-SQL queries when I was doing ops.
No, I mean, this is a very real scenario. I mean, there are batch jobs that run with Lambdas or ECS Fargate, and suddenly, for 10 minutes in a day, you will see an insane number of connections. And then those connections are held for a very long time.
Yeah.
And then the database will start, redlining very, very quickly. And then you'd be like, no, look at the peak performance. It's crazy. And when you really get down to it, it's just a bad pattern. Your database is probably going to do really well as long as you had the same connection. So I'd say before you get started with anything, put the RDS proxy in place.
Very cool.
And then get started with then look at the recommendation.
I would say enable performance insights.
Yes.
And then
Correct.
take a look at the recommendations, because that extra additional layer of data is extremely helpful to your DBAs.
Yeah.
You're probably.
That?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually don't know off the top of my head. That's something I should probably know. I'll look into it. But for me, whenever we have the same kind of question when it comes to like enabling CloudWatch on EC2 recommendations, where there is a cost to CloudWatch. The first, 13 fields are free in CloudWatch. So if you're under that number count, you can enable like the memory metrics and it's not going to cost anything. But if you have to pay for it, and if you have good retention policy set up, it's about a quarter.
So like the enhanced infrastructure metrics, right?
Yeah, it's about a quarter.
Yeah.
And if it's well configured, as far as the CloudWatch cost goes, but then the amount of savings you get increases by over 327%.
Right. So you get the quarterback.
And so you get the quarterback really quickly. In fact, you get the quarterback if you only take one of those recommendations out of like 1,000, right? So
don't overthink
this. Just turn it on, right? You will get the money back, especially if the DBAs see it and they're like, oh, yeah, let's get on that, right? They see the DB load, they see the swap, they're like, okay, this is very clear. Let's go after this. And again, like, because to our earlier conversation, getting engineers to take action, I mean, that was the number one finding from the FinOps survey for several years running.
Right.
This is how we do it. We do it with trust. We do it with data transparency. We do it by showing our math, right? Show your homework. And we want to keep doing that. We want to keep showing our math on the recommendations on like, hey, here, double check us.
Yeah.
Or what we did with EC2, we're like, hey, you don't like it. Here's the preferences. You
can set the
you
parameters.
Set that. Yeah, you change the percentile value. You change the amount of buffer you add into the recommendation. Go for it. Knock yourself out. The defaults have to be pretty conservative by choice because we don't know the sensitivity of your environment. So here's some very safe recommendations. And if you want to save a little more, if you're okay running a little bit higher utilization, go ahead. And a lot of value. You can squeeze the lemon a little harder.
Yeah. We will also be coming up with the fixer very shortly for the RDS. Of course, like we've done with every fixer, the documentation is out there for you to do it. It's really simple. You can just go into the console and do it yourself if you needed to. Yeah. But if you want to, just rely on automation that has been tested and you don't want to spend your engineers' effort and time doing something that it doesn't necessarily add tons of value to your org, but it's it's readily available for you to just turn on and use immediately. You can check out CloudFix. Another quick plugin, CloudFix, for anyone who's getting started right now, is absolutely free. We'd love to see what you do with the savings. Like, how much can you get? One of the big areas of conversation that we have constantly is there are tons of recommendations. Like the average resource utilization is abysmally low across all cloud providers, not just within AWS. But it's always baffled me to understand just psychologically what are the barriers to accepting those recommendations. So we're running a bunch of experiments. We are making some of these levers really easy to pull. So we're like, okay, if it was zero cost for the tool, what would you do?
Yeah, that's great. And I'm always fascinated by the answers because we want to solve the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
What are the reasons why I can't take this recommendation?
Right.
Sometimes it just comes down to culture. If an organization is interested and cares and they have the sort of authority and the value system in the company to say, you're accountable and go ahead. It's okay to make a mistake, right? Are they growth mindset? These are like really big indicators on if they're going to take recommendations or not.
And just aligned incentives, right? The people who are spending, are they get rewarded for spending more or spending less or building an empire or...
Yeah. Or do they have a savings newsletter? That's a big one. Like, are they celebrating the people that take recommendations and, take accountability for spend reduction? It's pretty cheap and easy to celebrate the people that embody your company's culture. Right?
Yeah, that's true. So what's your summary of FinOps from this time?
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's
like, what did you take away and what are you looking forward to next year? I know you have a ton of stuff
That's
lined
another
up.
big question. Wow. FinOps X was fantastic. Being part of the community officially, going in person, I had a lot of fun. Also working with our executive team on the messaging and what we want to share with the community, right? And the day 2 keynote where we got up there and we talked about like trust, right?
Yeah.
I love that. I spend like every day working on trust as a job. This is my job, to build trust with customers and build products that are trustworthy.
Yeah.
And so for my executive team to get up there and talk about trust, and what's really cool is just kind of the way Amazon works is our VPs, they work with us all the time. And we do doc reviews. We go through the features together. We talk about what we're trying to accomplish. And our VPs dive really deep. Like really deep. Our VPs are looking at the API call results on a regular basis. So when James Greenfield is up there talking about trust, he's talking about it because we've talked about it.
And it is core. It's really central and core to the service and the capabilities.
His customer obsession is showing, right? When he can get up there and talk about trust and flexibility and elasticity, because he cares about those things. And he knows multiple levels below in our organization, that's what we're working on. And, we didn't have to work too hard to pull that message out because it's what we do. It's what we care about, right? We just wanted to tell that story. We wanted to communicate how important it was for us that we came to X to tell a story and to listen. We wanted to tell the story that like we're investing in the FinOps community. We're listening to the FinOps community. And we're here together to advance the FinOps community and the practice of FinOps and launch announcements, features, but also our executives getting up and telling their perspective. And James is so down to earth and earnest about it.
Yeah.
You could really tell he was talking about it from his perspective and thoughts and opinions. And that's really cool to see as an employee that works for him.
Yeah, even as the audience, I completely agree with that. reInvent is coming up in November. In general, I do see that reInvent and FinOps X have different audiences, right?
Yeah.
FinOps is a very focused audience towards efficiency and making sure that there's accountability, all of those core principles. From your team's standpoint, how do you see these two events? I mean, reInvent is obviously really big for you guys.
Yeah.
And FinOps X now seems to also be really, I mean, you guys were, 30-odd folks who had come in.
Yeah.
Huge team, huge presence, amazing engagement with the community. How is it different for you guys internally?
We're going to see.
Okay.
I don't know totally yet. I mean, I can tell you from the past several reInvents, we love to launch at reInvent. We love to bring new technology to market. We love to help customers solve problems. We have a lot of customer meetings at reInvent too, where we get to engage with our customers and have productive conversations. The customers typically bring people that are one or two steps above their FinOps team to reInvent. And so the conversations are more VP level potentially, or CTO level. And FinOps X is definitely, it's the person that just spent a week analyzing their savings plan, right? And I love hearing from that persona, that individual. When they get frustrated and they've got feedback, that's gold for us, right?
Right.
We do get a lot of that at reInvent too. And the reason why I'm kind of like not sure on the delta between the two is because at reInvent last year, we did a FinOps event. It was like just like 3 weeks after we joined the foundation. So we had very short time to plan and pull this together, but we did a Meet the Experts FinOps event. And we had a certain number of slots available for people to come in and meet kind of a panel of product managers. The number of seats we had available to do that, and the foundation coordinated all of this with us. It was incredible. They really pulled out all the stops to help us out in such a short time span. But we got way more interest than we had seats for this event. And look who showed up. It was all the FinOps practitioners. It was all the people we know and love. Merit shows up. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the same like 20, 30 FinOps, the kings and queens, the royalty of FinOps shows up to the event and talks our ear off. And we love it. It's great. So we actually did get a pretty nice, focused FinOps group of people there that gave us direct feedback. And,
Got it.
we were able to talk about the launches we did that day with them directly, one-on-one kind of interactions. What I really like is that X is just about halfway around the calendar from reInvent.
Right.
So that's kind of nice. We were able to kind of package up and really target FinOps X as a launch cadence that we wanted to hit, because being able to go and present on stage and show, hey, this is what we built, this is why we built it.
Right.
Telling the story of why we built something and how you can use it is so valuable. And it's different than just a what's new post and a blog post where you can kind of read through it and you're like, okay, cool. But like the day 2 keynote, we showed a demo of the data exports, and it was really simple. Somebody clicked data exports, and it was our product manager who built the feature. And it was just a screen cap of a screen, and he clicked exports. He named the export. He picked an S3 bucket, and he clicked export. Right, like that was our video. But that's cool because we like to build things and show people what we built.
Right.
That's pretty much our whole cycle. And so this gives us a really nice cadence of time between those two events that allow us to kind of target, hey, this is an opportunity to not just launch something, but launch it with our customers.
Right.
Go there, talk to them about it, sit down, ask, hey, can you use this? Is this is this going to solve the problem that you had that we communicated about last year or 6 months ago or whatever time frame? So they are different events. The quality of conversations at FinOps X is unfathomably high. With the FinOps Foundation, we feel like we can get that out of reInvent too. So I'm looking forward to both quite a lot.
Yeah. I'm always grateful for you and your team for spending so much time sharing all of these insights, because I think it's really important to get it out there. The cloud, there's a lot of conversation out there right now where people are starting to think or question whether the cloud makes sense for them or not. You will see folks kind of going in all kinds of directions. And largely, I think it boils down to education and understanding what your use case is. Does it really apply, and making the right decision? One way or the other. In some cases, it might just make sense to not to be in the cloud, but I don't think people really understand all the levers that they can put, and therefore educating them is a really important part. And I really appreciate the amount of time that you and your team spends in explaining about all the waste, all the optimizations that can be done, and making it really simple for someone to consume it. And I think it just boils down to the safety and the trust factor that you guys spend such an enormous amount of time working on.
That's great to hear. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty hard to beat the pricing of like a 3-year all upfront, all right, or a savings plan, right? So,
Yeah.
But that's just discount optimization.
Right.
There's still usage optimization on top of that, and if you're doing both, it's pretty hard to beat the pricing of cloud if you're doing these things, right? If you're optimizing all your resources and then committing,
in terms of economies of scale. Right?
Yeah.